Thank you. Thanks so much. No substitute for Joe. No music, no AV, all that stuff that he does. I don't have a clue. But I do have a few thoughts that I'm happy to share this morning. You saw the photo of fall, and we're working on our dark emotions, grief, and rolling into despair. And fall or autumn, this time of year, um, for many, it really does trigger melancholy and um, feelings of loss. And, we have diminished light, diminished warmth. Um, we have that very short window of brilliant color, and then all of a sudden everything becomes very bleak. And um, during winter, of course, there's no color. So so much we lose a lot in autumn, but I think there's a lot of hope that comes with autumn as well. So I thought that what I would do is start with a poem from Rilke, the Austrian poet and novelist, who's considered a mystic by so many. So this is called Autumn by Rilke. The leaves are falling, falling as if from far up, as if orchards were dying high in space. Each leaf falls as if it were motioning no. And tonight, the heavy earth is falling away from all the other stars in the loneliness. And yet, there is someone whose hands, infinitely calm, hold up all this falling. I'll read it one more time. It's called Autumn. The leaves are falling, falling as if from far up, as if orchards were dying high in space. Each leaf falls, as if it were motioning no. And tonight, the heavy earth is falling, away from all the other stars in the loneliness. And yet there is someone whose hands, infinitely calm, hold up all this falling. So, I think that he ends in a very hopeful way. And when you think about fall and autumn, leaves are composted in preparation for growth in the spring, new seeds are planted. You can think about this time of year as really being one of preparation for new growth. And in the same way as we do this work, and we find, at least I have found, that the work I do, the meditative work I do here and every day, in my life, I see it. I don't see it while I'm sitting, but I see it in my life. And so I know I'm growing through doing this work. So I wanted to mention a few words about the actual word autumn and fall and the seasons. It is interesting that this time of year, autumn is the one season that actually has two names. Every other season has one name. And before it was autumn, it was called harvest. So this time of year actually has three names. Winter and summer, those names have been around for over 1,000 years, but spring and fall are much more recent. And it's almost like they're the distant cousins of the most brilliant, intense seasons of the year. There is also another meaning for harvest, and it's something that is a practice of mindfulness that many do this time of year, which is essentially taking stock of your year, taking a look at what happened this year, what good, what not so good? What did you learn? You know, where's the wisdom? Um, I I don't know if you want to write about that at some point or just think a little bit about it, but it's a good time to take stock. And I know if I were to look at my year, I would say the big thing was the publishing of the book that I did on for the college students. And what was not so good about that was the fact that it was by far the hardest book I've ever written. It was, I had several mini nervous breakdowns writing this book, but I shared those with friends, and so I got through them. And but then, so that's kind of the negative, but then the positive is that there's something there now that exists, and hopefully young emerging adults will, if they find out about it, be able to ask themselves some questions they might want to otherwise ask themselves about whether they ought to be living the way they're living, or maybe change some things up. So good, bad. I know I've learned that when I have really hard times, and, you know, I mean, many of us, this year has been a really hard time. There's been a lot of medical challenges for us here. And, you know, so it's hard to say, okay, well, what's on the right hand of the ledger here? You know, this is all the bad stuff. But I think even in this book and in working with the dark emotions, we're told that if we can skip to the bridge of what's the wisdom, you know, what comes of this? What good comes of this? What did we learn? And how do we use it, you know, in the future? So, and there's you can harvest for the year and take stock of your year. And you can also do something that's even much bigger, which is taking stock of your life, of your whole life. This is a big project, but I know a few years ago, I facilitated a weekend retreat all around one poem that helped us to do this. And the poem is by William Stafford, and it's called Ask Me. And the first couple of lines are, sometime when the river is ice, ask me mistakes I have made. Ask me whether what I have done is my life. Ask me whether what I have done is my life. Because so often we live for our kids, we live for our spouses, we live for our mother, we live for, you know, all these other people, but are we living our lives? And that really takes some work to get to, well, what gives me joy? What gives me joy? You know, it's great that I'm helping all these other people, but what gives me joy? And that's a bigger job than taking, you know, stock of the year. But I can't imagine a more tragic thing than being 95 years old, if I live that long, and having my head on the pillow and reflecting on my life and feeling like I lived everyone else's life, but not my own. So it's important work. So that's another way to think about harvest. So I wanted to transition to, when you think about fall and leaves falling away, and Rilke's poem, several spiritual writers write about how we must have things fall away if we are to grow spiritually. So it's that sort of that paradox of less to get to more. And I learned meditation via centering prayer. So Thomas Keating is the kind of the father of centering prayer. He modernized it, for us in the 70s. He died a few years ago, a Catholic monk who brought centering prayer practice, just simplified it for the rest of us to be able to use it. And what he would write about, a lot of his writing is about how what we have to have fall away is our false self. And, that's that sort of the trappings of the surface of our lives. And he was a big fan of Merton's. And I found out about this little book when I was staying at Joe Zendo in the Merton room. I didn't steal it from Joe. I actually bought my own copy. But I want to read what Merton says about the false self. Our false selves are the identities we cultivate in order to function in society with pride and self-possession. Our real selves are a deep religious mystery known only to God. The world cultivates the false self, ignores the real one, and therein lies the great irony of human existence. The more we make of ourselves, the less we actually exist. The more we make of ourselves. Joe often talks about the 3 A's, affluence, achievement, attractiveness, and how, that's what society wants us to be and to do. But that gives us zero joy, zero peace of mind. And that's why we do this work, and that's all part of this false self. So Keating and Merton, and then Rumi, who is a favorite of many, he wrote a poem called Tear Down This House. And he calls our false self a house that we've erected around our hearts to keep us separate from everyone else. And his solution is demolition. So if you look up the poem, you'll see it's all about demolition. Keating, back to Keating, what he talks about in this process of how do we do this, how do we get rid of this false self, is divine therapy, which is something that happens somewhat mysteriously, but when we sit in meditation, if we really practice over time, a lot of the repressed material of unconscious, subconscious traumas, things that are deep-seated that we don't even know about, begin to loosen up and fall away in this process. And I know that's been true for me. So, so that's pretty cool. And then the last writer I wanted to mention is Bill W., who is founder of 12-Step Recovery. And since I've heard many of you mention that you're in 12-Step Recovery, I figured I'd bring him in. I'm in 12-Step Recovery. And what he said is we need to have fall away our egos. And Joe helped me to understand the difference between sort of left brain ego and pride ego, but I think in both cases, we're talking about the same thing here. And he suggests doing that through steps 4, 5, 8, 9, ridding ourselves of a lot of the stuff we've been carrying around so that we can travel lighter. I know myself going through recovery, I had to rid myself of alcoholism, workaholism, perfectionism, controlism, which isn't even a word, but that's part of it, to get to a place where I could be open to meditation and open to the healing that comes with the work we do. So those are a few thoughts. So this week, speaking of things falling away, this week I contracted COVID, and thankfully I'm in the upswing of it. How many of you have had it? um, I don't think I'm the only one, but in any event, what falls away when you have COVID, I've learned, or just been reminded, is that basically all your routines, everything that you've done, that you normally do, grocery shopping, all these things just fall away because you're back to where we were in, early 20, when we were all in a place of isolation. And I think one of the biggest gifts and beauties of COVID, and there have been very few, but has been this community, because this community was born because of COVID. And I will tell you that this is the first time I've ever had it. And the other thing that's fallen away for me is taste and smell. And you realize and appreciate how much those two senses make a huge difference in your life. And, lighting a candle, you can't smell, nothing, food. So, I'm hopeful that it's just all part of the process, but all of these things falling away. But it got me to thinking about when we first came together, as a community. And it was during that 2020 time period. And one of you, and I don't know which one, I don't remember, but in 2020, one of you introduced a poem or mentioned a poem, which I pulled up because it's such a beautiful poem of hope, and it has to do with COVID, but I also think it has to do with more than that. And so I'm going to read it, and it's And the People Stayed Home by Kitty O'Meara. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows. And the people began to think differently, and the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. I sense a lot of healing goes on every Sunday, starting at 11 Eastern time here. I know it has for me. And I just want to sort of close my comments with Joe, because I think this book, well, you can tell what I think about this book. It's dog-eared all over the place, but Cave of the Heart, God, he's got some really powerful stuff in here. And the one poem, which I think marries up to Kitty O'Meara's poem, is talking about the pandemic and healing, but it's more than that. It's about what happened during that time with Black Lives Matter and Trump and all of the divisiveness, and many of us wanting to come together and not be divided. So I'm going to close with his poem on page 33, In the Open Space. Many of us are living in the broken space between stories. We no longer believe the old story of separation, the old story of the chosen people, the old story that believes in walling off the others, the old story of racial purity, the old story of empire. As the old story breaks down, some look for medicine to staunch the pain. Make America great again. Revive the old story. Return to the old story. Those of us who are living in the space between the breakdown of the old story and the not yetness of the new story must simply hold the pain in our broken hearts and transform it into the new story of interbeing. Buddha and Jesus taught this new story by living it. Only the heart can hold the pain created by the old story. And only a heart that can break will birth a new story. A more beautiful world will come from the brokenhearted. And I think every Sunday when we come together, we each do our small part in healing the world, whether it's through Tonglen or whatever our practices are. I'm just convinced that the meditative practice that I do and that I know others do, when you go out into the world, you're a better person. And and I'm so grateful to Joe for bringing us all together as he did in 2020. And I'm grateful for this book, which I think is his best book so far. Hopefully he'll have many, many more. So those are my thoughts for today. And I guess now what we need to do is move into meditation.